This is a story about a rebel Texas musician, Luke Stone, who loses everything he treasures in life to the 40-foot walls and the iron bars of Leavenworth Penitentiary. How is it possible that, in America, a man can be convicted of a crime he did not commit? Locked in a prison of her own, attempting to live with only half a heart, is Darlina Flowers a fool to keep holding to nothing but memories and a dream? Join Luke and Darlina as they continue their epic journey through shackles and chains, drugs and gurus, with undying love as their North Star.
Book lovers unite! I'm Demethius Jackson, and you're listening to the Chapter 1 podcast. The greatest stories ever written all begin with Chapter 1. In each episode, our guest authors will share their first chapters with you. On today's episode, we have an amazing author. Her name is Jan Sikes. Jan tells true stories in a creative way, and today she'll be reading from her second book entitled The Convict and the Rose. And it starts right now.
They locked me in a tiny cell, made my life a miserable hell. The stone-cold gray walls and unforgiving steps leading to Leavenworth Penitentiary spared no welcome to Luke Stone as he descended from the prison bus. Iron ankle chains chafed his skin, and the heavy handcuffs and belly chain bit into his wrist. He hopped from the bottom step to the ground and cast a wary glance at his destination. The man ahead of him stumbled and fell to his knees. The guard quickly prodded him with his nightstick. "Get up, convict, no lagging behind." Luke gritted his teeth and tightened his jaw, but remained in line. The formidable steps grew as he went. 37, 38. The chains gnawed at the skin around his ankles. Number 42. The massive doors groaned open, ready to swallow his life as he passed through. Guards escorted the prisoners through a total of 6 heavy metal doors leading deeper into the belly of the prison. They slammed shut with a deadly ring that echoed off the stone walls. Jaw set, eyes as hard as the steel that held him captive, Luke shuffled forward. Armed guards stood with pointed guns, ready to fire at any sign of aggression as they lined up the new prisoners in military fashion. Luke glared as a lieutenant removed his chains. "Welcome to Leavenworth Penitentiary, boys. You're in admissions and orientation." A captain walked down the line, looking each convict in the eye. "This is going to be your home for a while, so I suggest you treat it as such." Luke didn't blink when the man paused in front of him. He'd never think of this prison as home. Thoughts of his family back in Texas crowded his mind, leaving an incurable ache inside his chest. How could he have let himself get so reckless and uncaring? He had been a damn fool to get caught in the tangled mess that landed him behind bars. Standing to the left of Luke, Tommy, Red Johnson, shifted from one foot to the other. The sheriff of Tom Green County had sneered when he announced to them that as rap partners being sentenced at the same time for the same crime, they would cell together in Leavenworth. It had been a long trip from Texas to Kansas. Luke hoped this orientation bullshit wouldn't last much longer. The words from the aging judge still echoed in his brain. "Luther Martin Stone, I hereby sentence you to 25 years in the federal penitentiary for armed bank robbery. This sentence is to run concurrently with the 50-year state of Texas sentence you already have." Shit, that was a lifetime. He longed for freedom in the open sky. His identity now consisted of a number, 87047-132. The last 3 digits indicated where the arrest and conviction took place. He guessed the first part of the number was simply the next available in line, since Red's was 87046-132. At any rate, the number would forever be branded in his DNA. Red's sentence, identical to his, put him in captivity alongside Luke. Now here they stood like a herd of cattle at Leavenworth Penitentiary on December 12, 1971. The continuing nightmare unfolded one dreadful scene at a time. Luke's naked skin burned as a blast from the water hose and the chemicals it contained hit him with force. Like the other convicts, he tried to dodge the onslaught. After gritting his teeth through a humiliating cavity search, a guard issued him a set of clothing consisting of khaki pants, a white t-shirt, and a button-up khaki shirt. Among too many things to name, he missed the blue jeans, boots, and western shirts he had customarily worn on the outside. Once dressed, guards ushered the new inmates into a rectangular room where a lieutenant delivered further instructions. You'll stay in admissions and orientation unit of this facility until you receive job and cell block assignments. Your personal belongings are being processed and will be returned to you once they are inspected and approved. Luke and Red followed the rest of the men into another long, narrow room where 20 or more metal cots lined the walls. Coarse cotton sheets and a thin wool army blanket lay on each bed. The frigid December air permeated the stone walls, settling deep into their bones. Luke located his prison number on a card attached to a cot and plopped down. Red's was the next bed down the line. He sat down, lit a cigarette, passed it to Luke, then lit another for himself. "Well, Hoss, this sure ain't no kind of home, and it's damn cold here in this Yankee prison." Luke took a long drag off his cigarette. Red reached for the blanket lying on his cot and wrapped it around his shoulders. "Fucking cold for sure." He lowered his voice, glancing around. "I learned when I was locked up in Florida that kitchen duty is the job to ask for. We can get a hustle going, trading shit to moonshiners for cigarettes and coffee. At least it'd be warm in the fucking kitchen. We'll ask for it. We've got to stick together." Luke stood and spread the sheets and blanket on the cot. A captain made his way down the row of beds. He paused to watch Luke haphazardly spreading the sheets. "Stone, that ain't no way to make a bed." His voice cut into Luke like a razor blade. "What do you mean?" Luke struggled to keep his voice even as he turned to face the uniformed man. "You're supposed to make your bed military style." "Is that so?" Luke's eyes narrowed. "Don't know what military style is. The only military I ever recognized was the Confederate Army, and they didn't have a damn thing except a blanket to sleep on the ground if they had that much." The captain snorted. "I'm going to show you once how to do it. You need to bounce a quarter off the sheets. No disrespect, sir, but quarters ain't allowed in here." The captain's face flushed. He made the bed and tightened the sheets down, then bounced a quarter off them. "That's the way it's done, smartass, and that's the way I want to see it from now on." Luke lay back on the metal cot, and the man moved on down the line. Red attempted to imitate what the captain had done. "Hell, I didn't know we were going to be in a military prison." "We ain't, stud. They can't throw us out of here for not making our bed right, so fuck 'em." The rebel spirit he'd lived with all of his life rose up full force. What could they do to him? He was already in prison, so what else? "Man, I don't want to get in trouble and be sent to the hole." "Shit, Red, we're already in the hole." "Solitary confinement's different. You're in there all by yourself." "That sounds good to me. Think if I don't make my bed right, they'll take me to the hole?" "I don't know, man, but I don't want to go." The men lay on the hard cots and finished their cigarettes. The smokes would have to last until they could get some goods to trade for more. Being a survivor, Luke Stone knew he could make it in prison. His size and toughness served him well on the outside, and would here too. He had never taken any shit off anyone and wasn't about to start now. Prison be damned. He wasn't sure about Red, but he'd protect the smaller man with his life. Hell, Red was like a brother to him. They'd been through a lot together. A few days later, they received their cell assignment and started kitchen duty. The caseworker questioned both of them as to their reasons for wanting that particular job. It was common knowledge that convicts generally hated working in the kitchen. Sticking to the plan, they proclaimed an interest in going into the restaurant business when they got out of prison. The caseworker bought their story. It didn't take long to figure out how to smuggle sugar, fruit juice, and bread dough from a huge vat, tomato paste, and anything else that could be used to make booze. They secured the loot in plastic bags and taped them to their legs inside the baggy khakis they wore. Christmas Eve came, and Luke discovered how little the holidays meant inside these walls. Not one bit of Christmas spirit could be found. The small aluminum Christmas tree with a couple of scraggly ornaments did nothing to help. Luke and Red were invited by one of the Indian moonshiners who they supplied to come down to his cell after count for a drink. Having learned quickly the necessity of staying alert, Luke watched over his shoulders at all times. Men who let their guard down didn't survive. In the short time he had been there, he had already witnessed one murder and several beatings. When they reached the moonshiner's cell, Luke shot a glance in both directions down the long tier before entering. Inside the cell, a tall Indian guy named Joe dipped a cup of what looked and smelled like throw-up out of a plastic bag he pulled out from his locker. He poured it into their cups. "Thanks, man," Luke said. He wondered what Joe's crime had been, but also knew that you never ask. The stench of the homemade tomato hooch almost made him gag. Red took a big swig and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "This ain't Jim Beam, but it'll do." Luke forced a couple of sips, and his stomach began burning as if a fire had been lit in it. He made polite talk, then excused himself and strode back to his cell. He'd drank a lot of booze in his lifetime, but nothing like this, and decided that he'd rather out than drink the haphazardly made hooch. 2 weeks later, after their work shift ended for the day, Luke and Red made their way to the recreation room where inmates could watch TV, play dominoes or cards. A few older men with dull-eyed stares sat in the front of the room watching a small TV. Some men sat behind them, and further back were Indians and Mexicans. A rerun of Gunsmoke blared through the room. The two men sat in the back and lit smokes, of which they now had an ample supply from trading with the moonshiners. After a few minutes, a large, burly black man sauntered to the front of the room and changed the TV channel. The older men grumbled loudly, but no one moved. Luke had no tolerance for bullying. He walked up to the TV and switched it back to Gunsmoke. "Hey, motherfucker, what do you think you're doing?" the man yelled. "I'm changing the TV back to the show these men were watching, asshole. I didn't hear you ask anyone if you could change it." The man stood, legs spread. "Nobody pushes me around." "Show him what happens to whiteys in here if they don't mind their fucking business, Eugene," a man bellowed. "If you don't like it, come on and let's do something about it, you son of a bitch." Luke glanced around for anything that would serve as a weapon. In the back corner of the room he spotted a mop with a wooden handle and a bucket. He made a beeline for it and turned around as the man raised his fist to hit him. A resounding crack filled the air as Luke broke the mop handle over the man's head. He fell to his knees, flailing his arms. Luke continued beating him and kicking him until he sprawled on the floor in a puddle of blood. Within minutes a swarm of guards surrounded them. They quickly pulled Luke off the man, cuffed him, and requested a gurney for Eugene. "What in the hell is going on here?" the guard holding Luke growled. "This son of a bitch came at me. I had no choice." "We don't tolerate fighting in here. I can send you to the hole for this offense." "Take my ass to the hole. I don't give a fuck. From what I've seen so far, this entire place is a hole." The guard motioned to the other two officers. "Get this man out of here." Inside the small, isolated, box-like cell, Luke lay on the hard cot in the semi-dark. It was finally quiet. No noise from the hundreds of other men who shared the cell block with him. No radios, no yelling, no sounds of masturbating or rape. He relaxed for the first time since he had been escorted through the doors of Leavenworth. For a brief moment he allowed himself to think of Darlina Flowers, the sweet lady he had left behind in Texas. She had captured his heart completely and often invaded his thoughts in the wee hours of morning. The familiar floral smell of her silky auburn hair, etched in memory, haunted him. He ached for her touch, the taste of her warm lips and her sensuous body. In anger he pushed her out of his mind. He couldn't let himself have a weakness for anyone or anything. He knew the fight with Eugene wasn't over. There would be retaliation. Animal instincts were all he had to rely on in order to survive in this place, and he had used all of his senses to stay alive. He had dared to dance with the devil, and damned if it didn't look like the devil was winning.
Okay, so this is the part of the show where we would normally do advertisements if we had advertisements. Granted, it's the second episode, so we're a bit lacking in that department. But that's okay, because that means there's plenty of opportunity for you to advertise on this show. Just send us an email to info@chapter1podcast, that's ch1podcast.com, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. And by we, I mean me, since I'm the only employee on this show. Okay, let's get back to it. So thanks for joining me today, Jan. I'm really happy to have you on the show.
I am thrilled to be here.
Very cool. You write fiction based on true stories. Can you tell us a little about that?
You know, the proper genre is actually called creative nonfiction, which is telling a true story through fictitious characters. And the reason I chose that genre is because it is such a very personal story. And in order to be able to actually tell it, I had to separate from it, and I could do that by creating these characters. And that made it work for me.
What compelled you to write based on true stories as opposed to just creating fictional characters? And you did hint that this was a personal connection.
Right. Well, for many, many years, people who would move in and out of our lives, myself and my husband, who's now deceased, would always tell us, somebody needs to write your story. And I always thought someone would come along and write our story. And I woke up one morning and I realized that I had to do it because I was the only one that was there. And rather than try and relate it to another person and tell another person what happened, I decided to tackle it. My sister is an author, and that helps. It helped a lot. She was a great support. But I took classes and just kind of figured out where to start and dove in.
Absolutely. And who better to tell your story than you within your own words? Your main characters, Luke Stone, Darlina Flowers, are they real people or are they based on characters you created?
Well, the names, they are real people. They are, Darlina is myself.
Oh.
And I came up with that name because when I was born, I had heard this story all my life that my mom wanted to name me Darlene, and that my brother, who is quite a bit older than I at the time, insisted that I be named Janice, which is my full name. So as it came about that I decided to tell the story through fictitious characters, I decided to use that name that Mom wanted to give me back then and put an A on the end of it. And then Luke Stone is Rick Sikes in true life. And that name just kind of fell out of the sky at me. And my first book was called Flowers and Stone, which Darlina Flowers and Luke Stone, and
right.
It also described our personalities, or kind of the whole aspect of the character, the flowers and the stone.
It also describes their situation, stone, imprisonment,
right.
flower,
Exactly.
The love that is just beyond his grasp. That's really cool.
Thank you.
Really interesting.
Thanks.
There's a really powerful dynamic between Luke and Darlina because, in a sense, both are prisoners, correct?
Correct.
So how do you think that plays into the story?
Well, the whole premise of The Convict and the Rose is not about being locked in prison, because everybody knows that that's unpleasant, but it is about the growth that each one of them went through in their own situations. Luke being physically locked behind bars, and Darlina being locked into an empty life with Luke gone and no hope of him ever returning, and trying to figure out how to live without this person whom she loved so much. So in her journey, she tried a lot of different things in trying to fill the empty space, trying to find something. So what we see as the book goes is just a lot of growth in both characters and growing into the kind of people they needed to be to really be together.
Right, right. What's interesting is most people can't maintain long-distance relationships, not to mention prison relationships. So what do you think was there to drive them to even do this?
Well, as the book progresses and the years go by, I mean, we're talking, this book covers a span of 15 years. And there were times when Luke thought he was going to die in prison, and he would, in letters, tell Darlina that she needed to forget about him, move on with her life. She was young, she had her whole life ahead of her, and she tried in her own way to do that unsuccessfully. Because there was just something there. It went beyond earthly limitations.
That emotional bond that two people can have that transcends.
Yeah. So that really is the basis of the story of all of the books, is that bond that never would go away.
Also, the growth that Darlena experiences in the story is a reflection of your own story, because it is yours personally. Yeah,
I mean, when I first started trying to write them, I started out trying to do the I and the me and the we and the you, and I just couldn't do it. But by being able to separate through these characters, then I could go ahead and tell the story.
Put some space in between you.
Right.
Absolutely. Which was my next question. Did you find it difficult to write about experiences that were so personal to yourself?
You know, what I learned is there is a fine line of telling too much and telling just enough. And so, you know, I definitely did not tell everything in these stories because there are some things that don't need to be told. And yet I shared enough true personal events to make it, I mean, it's like reading a fiction book. It's written like a fiction book. Dialogue, the characters set up, everything is written like fiction. It's just all true.
So aside from incarceration, what are some of the other challenges that both Luke and Darlena face with their relationship?
You know, one of the things that they faced was that there was a great age difference between them.
Okay.
So in the first book, Flowers and Stone, where they meet, Darlena is 19 years old and Luke is 35. So when he wound up with a 75-year prison sentence, the math didn't look too good. And honestly, there were times when both of them really believed that he would just die in there. But there was always that little burning hope. And obviously there was not only walls and bars separating them, but a great distance between Texas and Kansas. So it wasn't like Darlena could run up every weekend and visit. But they stayed in touch through lots and lots of letters. She hitchhiked twice to Kansas to see him. Another thing, too, that you have to think about is that in writing letters, as opposed to sitting and talking with someone, sometimes you'll reveal a deeper part of yourself than you would otherwise.
Absolutely. And I'm sure through writing this book, you've learned a lot about yourself.
I definitely did. And, you know, even writing a true story and knowing what happened, there were still surprises along the way. You know, I kind of feel like I've been through the fire writing these books.
So what would you want readers to take from these books? Is this a story of love conquers all, or is it move on with your life? What would you say?
What I want the readers to take from these books, each book carries a separate message, but the Convict and the Rose in particular, the message that I hope the reader takes from it is that a person has a choice to take any negative situation and turn it into positive. And that is the whole premise of this book. And if a person can take that away and go, wow, if he could do that or she could do that, then I can do this.
With each book you publish, you also do something very unique. You also release music with each book.
I do.
How does that incorporate into the story?
Luke Stone was a musician. And it was his entire life. Mm-hmm. He was a musician. So the stories all revolve and evolve around music. And so I decided to release a CD with each book that matches the time period of the book. It's all original music that just kind of seemed to go hand in hand. That, you know, the person reads the book and so much has taken place in that book regarding the music, and then boom, here's the music.
Are they his songs, or is this songs that were inspired by the events of the book?
They are his songs, and in the case of some of the later CDs, his and mine.
That's incredible. And you do have some incredible photos on your website, which I checked out.
Oh, cool.
And those were actually of his recording sessions.
Yes.
And very interesting. I do recommend checking out Jan Sikes' website.
Thank you. I do too.
So, outside the story, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what inspired you to write in the first place?
Well, what inspired me to write in the first place was the fact that the story needed to be told, and it was just there was a burning passion in me that pushed me forward out of my comfort zone to actually step out and do it. So I took some creative writing courses. I consulted with my sister, who is a very successful published author and mentor. She was amazing. And I just set out. And when I very first started, I thought I was just going to be able to do it in one book. No. And then I thought, okay, well, I can do it in 3 books. No. There's 4. But the 4th book is the end of this series. Boy, have I learned a lot along the way. And Hopefully my writing has improved as I've gone along, and that's the goal. The books have been very well received, and I've gotten some really awesome reviews. So I'm happy.
I know exactly what you mean about wanting to fit a story within one book.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if it wants to write itself, and it's
Yes.
going to come out however way.
Exactly.
So where can folks find you? Online or out there in the world?
Oh, I am all over the place. You can find me at jansikes.com. I also have a website for Luke, which would be ricksykes.com. And then I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. On Facebook, it is author Jan Sikes Books or Rick Sikes Music Page. On Twitter, it's RIJANJKS. I would love for everyone to connect, follow, comment. I welcome everybody to connect with me and let's talk.
And we'll have all that information in the show notes as well. Well, thanks, Jan. I really appreciate you coming and talking to me about your book. And once again, this is Jan Sikes. The name of the book is The Convict and the Rose. Check it out.
Thank you so much.
And with that, it looks like we'll wrap up another episode. Once again, I'm your host, Demethius Jackson, and you're listening to the Chapter 1 podcast. The greatest stories ever written all begin with Chapter 1. Hope you enjoyed this episode. We've got a lot of great things planned for the future, and we're looking forward to connecting with you again. Until next time.